Who was your first ever bias?
Jung-eun or Una by G-Friend.
정인?
I get this wrong because I often sing Lee No from Stray Kids, but it's not because it's Hwang Yibo from Unique.
B1A4 Barrow was my first bias. He's the rapper of the group.
I don't really remember who my first ever K-pop bias was, but I'm guessing it has to be Twice's Jihyo.
My first ever bias was Eunhyuk from Super Junior. Before I even knew what a bias was, I just liked his hair.
My first ever bias was Shiny's Taemin. I remember I watched Lucifer music video when I was like 13 and I thought, who's that boy with the long hair?
My first ever bias was Hyoyeon from SNSD.
P.O.P. from Big Bang.
My first ever bias was Park Bom from 21. I remember her song You and I, and yeah, she had really amazing vocals and still does. You and I together, it just feels alright. 이별이란 말은 내 누가 뭐라 해도 난 지킬게.
My first ever group was Treasure, so my first ever bias was Jungwoo.
Either icons or ex-icons BI or GOT7's Yu-Gi-Oh! It started at a similar time, so I'm not sure who was the first one.
Mark, GOT7.
My first ever bias, to be honest, is Dino. Dino is really cute at what shit his dance moves.
Jennie from Blackpink.
My first ever bias is Big's End. To this day, soft for him. My first ever bias was RM from BTS.
Probably I am from Monster X because he introduced me into K-pop.
Taeyang. group I stan was BTS, but I didn't know all the K-pop terms, so I had no idea what a bias was or what a bias wrecker was. So the first person to actually call my bias was JB.
My first ever bias was Chanyeol from EXO.
My first ever bias was Chanyeol from EXO.
My first K-pop bias was Rain of New East. Same for her.
We share the same first bias.
Yeah, he's bold, he's fearless, and if you know, you know.
Our role model.
Yeah.
My first ever bias was Yoongi from BTS. Still has a very special place in my heart, but yeah, Yoongi from BTS.
My first bias was Yoongi from BTS.
We're gonna touch the sky for the day we die. The best yet to come.
My first ever bias was G-Dragon from Big Bang.
G-Dragon.
My first ever K-pop bias is G-Dragon from Big Bang. If I wouldn't have known him, I wouldn't be here where I am right now with K-pop, so I'm very thankful to him.
J-Hope. Mi primer bias fue J-Hope de BTS.
J-Hope.
The first idol I ever really stan was Hyunjin from Stray Kids.
Hyunjin from Stray Kids.
Hyunjin from Stray Kids.
Hyunjin from Stray Kids.
Jungkook from BTS.
My first ever K-pop bias was Jungkook from BTS.
My first bias is Jungkook from BTS.
Jungkook. Jungkook from BTS.
My first ever bias was Jungkook.
Felix from Stray Kids.
My first bias was Felix from Stray Kids.
My first bias was Felix of Stray Kids, and then it changed a few times, but now he's my alt.
Lee Felix.
It's Felix from Stray Kids.
My first bias was Felix from Stray Kids of Sunshine.
Jimin from BTS.
My first bias was Jimin.
My first ever bias was Jimin from BTS.
I came across like the idol pictures for Jimin with like the multicolors, and I think it was him.
My first ever bias was Jimin from BTS.
My first ever bias is Jimin from BTS.
My first ever K-pop bias was Jimin from BTS.
Jimin from BTS.
Yeah, the past was obviously the best. From a place is what comes next. When we sing next. You and that best moment is yet to come.
My first bias was V from BTS. He grabbed my attention right away, and I absolutely adore his voice. I think it's beautiful. My taste in men has changed a lot since V though, so yeah.
My first ever bias was V from BTS.
My first bias was Kim Taehyung.
V from BTS.
Taehyung from BTS.
My first bias was Taehyung from BTS. I still love him.
My first ever bias was Taehyung, and he was actually the one that got me into K-pop.
Taehyung from BTS.
My first ever bias was Kim Taehyung from BTS.
Hi, my name is V, and I'm a good boy, so Kim Taehyung.
V from BTS.
Kim Taehyung from BTS.
So my first ever bias was shocking Taehyung or V from BTS.
My first ever bias was Tae. I still remember the moment that I saw him in the Blood, Sweat and Tears music video for the very first time. I was like, that's mine. That's mine.